Bela Victor János Bartók was born in Hungary on March 25, 1881, and died in New York City 64 years later on September 26th of 1945. Despite his diminutive size, he was just a bit over 5 feet tall and rarely weighed more than 110 pounds. Bartók was a superb pianist with hands of steel. He played with fire, passion, and power. And except for an event in 1902, he would have pursued a career as a concert pianist, and we would all be the poorer for it. According to Bartók, quote, "I was hit as by a flash of lightning by the first Budapest performance of Richard Strauss's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This work stimulated the greatest enthusiasm in me. At last I saw the way that lay before me. Straight away I threw myself into a study of Strauss's scores and began to compose," unquote. Simultaneous with Bartók's infatuation with the German-born Richard Strauss was a growing fascination with the folk music of Eastern Europe. In 1905, Bartók began traveling from village to village with an Edison cylinder dictaphone machine, recording authentic folk music wherever he went. Between 1905 and 1917, he collected music in Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Croatia, Serbia, Turkey, and North Africa. Bartók's contact with and study of this folk music worked its way into his soul. His mature music was to become an extraordinary synthesis of his Germanic training and the folk music of Eastern Europe and North Africa. Exile. Bartók observed the rise of Nazism in the early 1930s with undisguised revulsion. In 1937, to Bartók's everlasting disgust, Hungary signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler's Germany. With the Nazi occupation of Austria in March of 1938, Bartók knew that it was only a matter of time before Hungary would be reduced to a vassal state as well. He wrote to his friend and patron, Paul Sacher, quote, "There is the imminent danger that Hungary will also surrender to this system of robbery and murder. How I could then continue to live or work in such a country is inconceivable," unquote. Bartók was 58 years old when he wrote those words and not in the best of health. Nevertheless, he began making plans to leave his beloved Hungary. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II began. Braving wartime travel, Bartók, his wife Dita, and their 16-year-old son Peter left for the United States 3 months later. In early 1940, they arrived in New York, where Bartók died 5½ years later. The Commission. In the late spring of 1943, Bartók was hospitalized with leukemia. Sometimes the cliché runs true. It's always darkest before the dawn. Unknown to Bartók, 2 Hungarian-American compatriots, the conductor Figyész, known better as Fritz Reiner, and the violinist József Szigeti, had convinced Serge Koussevitzky, the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, to offer Bartók a major commission. In June of 1943, Koussevitzky visited Bartók at the hospital and commissioned him to compose what turned out to be the Concerto for Orchestra. You want to talk about the medicinal value of chicken soup? Give me a commission from the BSO any day. Bartók got excited. He went into remission and his appetite returned. He informed Joseph Szigeti that his weight had soared from 87 pounds to 105 pounds, writing, quote, "I grow fat, I bulge, I explode," unquote. Bartók composed the vast majority of the concerto in an astonishing 7 weeks between August and October of 1943. He explained its title this way, quote, "The title of this symphony-like orchestral work is explained by its tendency to treat the individual orchestral instruments in a soloistic manner," unquote. Movement 1. This first movement is structured in traditional sonata form and begins with a slow and soulful introduction. Let's advance to the first theme of the sonata form, a theme that employs melodic and rhythmic elements inspired by the folk music of Eastern Europe. Let's be especially aware of the brief trombone melody that appears at the conclusion of theme 1. That seemingly inconspicuous trombone melody becomes the point of departure for one of the most stunning passages of brass writing in the entire repertoire. A spectacular fugal passage during which every brass player, 4 French horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and a tuba become de facto soloists. Movement 2. Bartók entitles this movement Gioco delle Coppie, which means game of pairs. It is titular truth in advertising. The movement is structured as a large-scale A-B-A form. In the opening A section, we hear a series of dances, each performed by a different couple. First, a couple of bassoons, then a couple of oboes, then clarinets, then flutes, and finally a pair of trumpets. Thus, the movement's title, Game of Pairs. Let's hear the beginning of this opening A section, which is accompanied by a snare drum. Our couples in this excerpt, our soloists, will be in order: bassoons, oboes, and clarinets. Movement 3. The third and central movement is a gorgeous, mysterious, and impassioned nocturne, a piece of night music. Along with Wolfgang Mozart and Frédéric Chopin, nobody did gorgeous, mysterious, impassioned nocturnes better than did Bela Bartók. At the heart of this third movement, and therefore at the exact midpoint of the 5-movement concerto, is a passage that sees the violas play a dark and mournful melody accompanied by tremolo, meaning trembling strings and harps that are meant to evoke a cimbalom, a hammered dulcimer, a Hungarian folk instrument. According to the French ethnomusicologist Yves Lenoir, the melody played here by the violas has much in common with Transylvanian funeral songs, information that broaches a really, really, really important point. That point? My friends, much of the apparent modernity of Bartók's music is not a function of an experimental or modernist impulse, but rather, it's the result of the synthesis of Eastern European and North African musical elements with the compositional techniques of Bartók's Germanic training. Movement 4. Bartók entitles this movement Intermezzo Interrotto, meaning literally interrupted interlude. The nature of the interruption itself is, well, disconcerting. About halfway through the movement, a bouncing, vaguely circus-like tune emerges in the clarinet. Initially, the orchestra reacts with hoots of derision, catcalls, and even a couple of Bronx cheers in the trombones. But then the orchestra joins in the fun, and the entire band plays the circus tune, smirking, leering, snickering, and chortling the entire time until the interruption just stops. Here is that interruption. According to both Bartók's son Peter and the Hungarian conductor Antal Dorati, this interruption is a parody of the invasion theme from the first movement of Dmitri Shostakovich's 7th Symphony, the so-called Leningrad Symphony. Dorati claimed that Bartók told him that, quote, he was caricaturing a tune from Shostakovich's 7th Symphony, which was then enjoying great popularity in America, and in his view, more than it merited. So I gave vent to my anger, Bartók said, unquote. Movement 5, sonata form. we are going to listen to the first 1 minute and 22 seconds of this awesome finale. And this is what we're going to hear. 1, a blaring horn fanfare based on alpine horn calls played by Transylvanian shepherds. 2, an almost literal transcription of a Romanian dance called a hora nemcească. 3, Bartók accompanies this dance by construing the orchestra as a gigantic Romanian gypsy band, complete with strummed guitar, plucked bass, and a drum. Symphonic in impact and concerto-like in its use of soloists, Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra is one of the great orchestral masterworks of the 20th century and one of the most viscerally exciting pieces of music ever written. Thank you.